Hello and welcome to the News9 Plus show on the world's first news and current affairs OTT platform, News9 Plus. Donald Trump has survived an assassination attempt. The attack on the former US president has aggravated an already bitter US political divide. As Trump is all set to be formally nominated as the Republican presidential candidate this week, we are asking if Donald Trump, already ahead in the poll ratings, will he win the elections after this shooting incident? Joining me to discuss this are my colleague Sridharan Ramakrishnan and Lieutenant Colonel Sundeep Sen, formerly of the National Security Guards. Gentlemen, welcome to the News9 Plus show. First up, I want to start by asking Colonel Sen this. Colonel Sen, you're a veteran, several decades in the Indian Army, in the NSG, 2611 veteran, where snipers were used extensively. What were your reactions when you saw the way the Secret Service that's supposed to protect Donald Trump, the way they reacted to the shooter, literally lying in the open? For 3 minutes, he had time to point his rifle and fire off a volley of shots at Donald Trump.
Now, when you see the complete incident, you see failures after failures after failures.
Yes.
The first I would like to mention is that the bubble of security which is supposed to be created by the protectees,
Yes.
for the protectee by the security agency, that bubble failed. The individual was there
Right.
on a rooftop, on a vantage position from where he can take a sniping shot in an open. It was not an urban scenario. The area is quite open. So it is
Yes.
very, very surprising. And he is also not camouflaged. He is white
Yeah, he was
background.
literally lying in the open. Everyone could see him. I think common people pointed him out.
Anybody can see. So if he cannot be picked up by experts, then there is a big gap in the way the security protocol has
Yes.
been handled.
Yes.
Number one. Number two, the choice of weapon he has taken, it's not a sniper rifle. He
Right.
has used a common AR-15 rifle, which is a
Yes.
normal infantry weapon, without any scope. I don't think so. Whatever I believe, he doesn't have a scope also. So it's not a sniper rifle. The rifle
Right.
uses a 5.56 ammunition, which is very small and not good for sniping.
Right.
It is just a infantry weapon to shoot on the enemy. Third thing, which is glaring, is he is able to aim and take a shot,
Yeah.
a repeated shot after shot after
Yes.
shot.
Yes.
Now, this is one part. The second part, when the shot has been fired and the bullet has missed, it is
Yes.
just a good luck that former President Trump missed by few inches. So after that, he ducks down himself, and then he has been covered by the rest of his close protectees,
Yes.
protection parties. Now, protection party is, I can hear and everybody can hear, they say, let's move. And no, then they stop. And then the President Trump stands again
Yes.
and gives a punching sign,
Yes.
giving another target. If there are another sniper, he could have taken another shot.
Right. Exposing
So
himself.
it is
They should never have allowed
exposing
him to
himself.
expose himself.
Yeah, he should have never been allowed. That iconic picture will remain always
Right,
with
right.
punching hand.
Absolutely.
But as a security professional, it is a failure on the part of the protection party, which is supposed to cover him and take him away from that
Yes.
danger area.
Yes.
You don't know how many shooters are more there. What
Right.
will happen next?
Right. Absolutely.
So these are my observations
Absolutely.
as
Very,
a professional.
very succinct observations. And, it doesn't come from anyone, Sri. This is Colonel Sandeep Sen, the hero of Nariman House, who's ringed Nariman House with his snipers, and he had to literally take those tough decisions between life and death, shooting a civilian or shooting a terrorist. So that iconic picture actually is a security fail, and that's something that common people wouldn't kind of be able to tell, but the professional knows
Yes,
that
absolutely.
he should never have been allowed to stand up a second time and give that,
Absolutely.
fight photograph, iconic picture it is. But Sri, you just finished writing a piece on Donald Trump for News9plus.com. Tell us your observations of this. You've been in the US for several months last year. Give us your sense of what this means for candidate Trump.
So, my piece actually asked that question whether we'll see a new Trump if he comes back to
Right.
the White House. will we see a new President Trump?
Yes.
One is, of course, the fact that he cheated death.
Right.
That's a transformational experience even for the best of people.
Yes.
You know, and Trump is 78 years old.
Right.
And he's cheated death not just to live, but potentially to become the president all over again.
Yes.
So will his new term be vested with some sort of an import of a larger calling? Will he stop being the pugnacious, reality TV star or host
Right.
that he was in his first term?
Yes.
You know, he brought in a lot of good policies, but
Right.
those policies, unfortunately, were lost under what I would call a less than presidential conduct in the
Yes.
in the Oval Office.
Right.
So I think in this term, we might see, if he were to come back to the White House, as a man who's quite different from the Donald Trump 1.0. So the 2.0 will be
Right.
probably very different, more presidential, and someone who probably thinks that God has let me live so that I can be a global statesman
Right.
and do something much bigger than what I did in my first term.
Absolutely. A chastened Donald Trump in his second
A
term.
grateful Donald Trump.
And a grateful
Yes.
Donald Trump. I mean, that's what, a near survival like this possibly does to you. But let's ask Pramit Pal Chaudhuri this, Shri. He joins us right now on the News9 Plus show. Pramit Pal is, of course, head of the Eurasia Group, the India practice. He's a astute foreign policy commentator, and he's been looking at the US elections very closely. Pramit, welcome to the News9 Plus show. Tell us your first impressions of what this means for Donald Trump's presidential bid, this near assassination attempt.
Well, I think everybody, and we don't have actually polling numbers yet,
Right.
at least I haven't seen any. But there's an assumption, we're definitely getting a lot of stories about Democrats panicking that this is now basically over for them. They were struggling anyway because of President Biden's mental conditions. And the polling, I think, was reasonably, poll of polls was reasonably clear that there were about 80 electoral college seats short of the majority requirement. And out of the 6 battleground states, the swing states that really mattered, 5 of them, Biden was trailing quite strongly. With this, I think we'll see a number of things. One is independent voters, in many ways the key swing vote, about 20-25% of them, who were conservative in many ways, Republican traditionally, but did not like Trump as an individual. We may see a large chunk of them swing back into the Republican fold, feeling that he has shown himself to have more character than they had expected. We'll also see a consolidation of the Republican vote. It's not like all Republicans liked Trump. About 10-15% of them said we prefer we had somebody else as a candidate. And in many ways, Biden positioning himself as a centrist, but not beholden to the extreme left of the Democratic Party, had been wooing them. That group, I think, will also now we'll see a consolidation of the Republican vote as well. So I think the fear for the Democrats was, while their chances of winning the presidency were always reasonably low, now their fear is that you're going to have a coattail effect in which both the Senate and the House also fall to the Republicans. In other words, all 3 elements of the executive and all the elected elements of the U.S. government go to the Republicans because of this event.
Right. Interesting coattail effect. We could actually look at what we call in India a landslide election. You see that? You see any signs of that coming, Sri?
No, absolutely. I completely agree with Pramit. In fact, I was last night after this, like the news happened, I was talking to a lot of friends of mine in the US, and many of them are, let's say, Democratic sympathizers. They have been. They identify themselves as Democrats and they vote for the Democratic Party.
Right.
One message which is coming out is that this is unacceptable.
Right.
Politics, political fights cannot be settled like this.
Yes.
And like Pramit mentioned, there are a lot of Democrats who don't necessarily obviously are not fond of Trump, But even they are beginning to sympathize with what has happened, that this is not done. And especially, we talked about the security failure previously. There are many questions that need to be answered, Sandeep. I think there was a total, complete lack of, failure, a lack of control on the environment in which Trump was placed and the protection. So that is one part. And there are people who are seeing conspiracy behind that as well. On both sides, but I think more in terms of, you just expose this man to unreasonable sort of risk. But even fence sitters in the US will probably now want to go with Donald Trump.
Right.
So I think Pramit's assessment and what Colonel Sen also said earlier, I think there is a significant shift that we're going to see, which is why this event, this incident is possibly going to be very decisive in the elections that are going to be held in November 2023.
Pramit, now, Trump is in Milwaukee even as we speak, and the Republican convention begins a few hours from now. What are the possible candidates that he could announce as vice president? And, there's a lot of names there. There's about a dozen names, including Vivek Ramaswamy, I think. What's your take on this? Who is the possible?
Unlikely. He may get a job, but certainly not as a VP.
not a VP.
Yes.
But let's hear Pramit's take on this. Well, who's the possible VP
it's a good question,
candidate?
and I'm not certain. Partly because as I was mentioned, this seems to be transforming Trump. If you see his New York Post interview, which was literally done on the airplane as he was flying from Pennsylvania to Milwaukee. And it's very clear that he has, there has been a certain sort of, he has seen this as something very different from anything he had ever thought of. He praises the Secret Service. And he says, I've thrown away my speech that I was planning to give in the convention. I was going to give a hard-line speech attacking Biden and the Democrats and everybody and all the enemies. And now I'm going to give a speech about the unity. I'm going to speak. It's almost like he's now genuinely becoming presidential. It's like this is
exactly
this is
what
epiphany.
the point that Sri made, that you're looking at Trump 2.0, more presidential Trump.
And he's not just talking about American unity, but global unity.
Global unity.
So you can be pretty sure that the first things it does when he comes into power would be to wade into Israel-Palestine fight and Ukraine-Russia war, and then sort those things out. I mean, those are the first things he's going to pick up and do.
God forbid. That's something that the world watches.
He might even endorse taking on climate. I mean, he might actually take that seriously.
Climate warrior. Oh my God! Right.
So I assume he has a vice presidential candidate in mind, and I have to admit I'm not certain who that would be.
Right.
I would have thought he would have gone for a female because he needs to compensate for the abortion issue, because that is really the weakest point for the Republicans, even among Republican women voters. Or even Republican men. That's a big issue. And to compensate, if you wish, for that, I would have expected him to go down that path, or a Hispanic, because they are
Marco
the biggest
Rubio.
minority. A DeSantis kind of person. I think he wouldn't choose one of the. My sense is he won't choose one of the regular Republican leaders. He'll choose somebody completely. Otherwise, I think he would have declared that by now. He's going to choose somebody after the experience of Mike Pence, where he feels he was betrayed by a normal Republican. He will, I think, go for somebody reasonably unknown, but I would have expected either a female or a Hispanic. Hispanics are the biggest minority in the country, and they are conservative. They are they vote for Democrats on economic issues, but are socially very conservative. They are conservative on abortion. They are conservative about school prayer, about God, and definitely opposed to things like transgender rights and so on, which they find unacceptable. So this is a group that would have been leaning for the Republicans and would have brought in, consolidated a hold on, especially in places like Arizona and New Mexico, which are swing states right now. So my guess would have been in that direction, but who knows? It's possible that after after the Butler epiphany in Pennsylvania, he may choose somebody completely different. He may change his mind at the convention.
Absolutely, the Butler epiphany.
So now Trump is free to pick whoever he wants.
Yes.
Earlier, he would have been basically, paying attention to, okay, what are the constituencies that we need to, please?
Right.
Is there a constituency that is unhappy with me? Is there someone that I need to please?
Hispanics,
all those things are now off the table.
Asians,
so
Americans,
whoever
Indians,
he wants, he can. After this incident, he can pick whoever he wants as
he
his
can.
VP. Yeah.
Yes, of course. And but while we talk about Trump and what he's going to do at the Republican convention, the elephant in the room, Sri, is still that security failure.
Yes.
And I'm sure Colonel Sen, his colleagues in the NSG and in the Indian Army and the SPG, for instance, they would be looking at this very closely. Colonel Sen, we know that the Secret Service is going to be hauled over coals for this, what happened. There is a hearing before the US Senate very soon, the US House of Representatives, I stand corrected. They are going to ask them a lot of tough questions. Now, you're one of those officers who literally restructured the NSG after the 26/11 failures. You made it more lean, the fact that you could respond much faster than you did in 26/11. Give us a sense of how the reform of the US Secret Service would look like. There's a big question being asked, for instance, that, in the quest for gender diversity, you've included women on the Secret Service thing. You see a lady there very prominently in that photograph. The fact that they may not have been fit for purpose. The US Secret Service has kind of atrophied. What are the quick kind of changes do you think would come into the Secret Service after the soul searching that the US government is going to do in the next couple of days?
I think they are in for a big overhaul. Why? Because you realize now we all have forgotten. President Trump survived. How he survived? Did he survive because of special operatives of their action? No. The the shooter was able to dispatch 4 or 5 shots, and after that he was taken care of. The counter sniping team has shot him later on. But he had done his job.
Yes.
Only thing which saved President Trump is, number one, the bad weapon choice, AR-50, and the bad shooter.
Yep.
That's all. Otherwise, the security officials were helpless. They could not save him. So they have to now rethink. Had a lot of heads will roll, knowing their way of functioning. I think they will, and I know the level of security for president is different, and president nominee is different, and candidates are different. But now they have to think about it, and I don't know what is their procedure, but the entire SOPs have to be changed.
Right.
As far as things are concerned, and the person who is responsible for overall production, I think they have to take the blame.
They have to take the rap for it, and as you said,
heads
will
roll.
Heads will roll.
Of course. Heads will roll. And second thing, I just want to make a point. For President Trump, it is, we all know that Americans love big guns, and they produce the best action movies, and they love war. They love war.
Right.
So now the public will consider him as a battle wounded soldier.
Yes,
and
yes,
his popularity will go up.
His popularity will go up, and he probably gets the military service that he never did, Pramit. And but I was
like getting a wound medal now.
A wound medal possibly, or Trump 2.0. But Pramit, I was reading about Teddy Roosevelt, that he was shot at in 1912, and it's a very famous speech that he gave with a bullet lodged close to his heart. I mean, it's incredible. What a story. But the downside of that story is that he lost the election. Roosevelt lost that election. He lost it. He beat his erstwhile protege Taft, but he lost to Woodrow Wilson, and he conceded the election. He says, I get it. I mean, it was the most famous speech ever given possibly by a US presidential candidate. He lost that election, but he took it graciously. You see something like that happening with Trump? Would the kinder, gentler Trump that we see now graciously accept the verdict of the American people?
I don't, I mean, it's hard to see him losing in the first place, but you know, elections this year in particular around the world have generally been throwing up surprises.
Right.
So let's assume for some reason, remember it's the electoral college that matters in America, but let's say a big swing state like, let's say, Florida, and the big northern Midwestern states, Michigan and so on, for some reason go Democrat rather than Republican. Then let's say he does come in, it'll be really the margin of victory that really matters.
Right.
If it's a very close fight, you know, like the Florida count between Gore and Bush, then you would see, I think, the Republicans push really hard for, let's take this to the Supreme Court, let's go ballot by ballot, let's fight on this issue. But if it's a reasonably large margin of victory, it'll be curious to see whether Trump really has the gumption to continue to fight. The only reason really that he might continue to fight would be the issue of, can this help in any way to reduce the court cases against me?
Right.
More than anything else, more than any real electoral concerns. But it's interesting that, you know, in the interview he gave, he was asked, you know, so what do you think saved you? And he says, well, you know, and he does, I think, ascribe it to God, that he says, luckily I turned right to go look for some statistics on illegal migrants, because there was obviously a teleprompter or something nearby. And he turned his face to read those statistics. And he said, that's why the bullet missed me, because a bullet would have gone right into my head, except that I turned, you know, by luck.
Right.
I'll just mention that on the Secret Service thing, you know, one of the things that happens, if, as opposed to a president, a candidate will often use a mix of Secret Service men and local police. Right. So what tends to happen is the inner circle of people around the candidate are Secret Service and specialized units like the snipers. But second and third circles are often just recruited from the local police stations. Right, and I suspect that's what we'll find, is that was handled by local police. And as was mentioned, you know, locals there are videos of locals actually taking photos of this man crawling up.
Of the potential
the police,
assassin.
hey, there's a guy there with a gun, and the police not responding because they don't know what to do, because they're not trained to respond. And I think this is the big weakness that you're probably going to see change, that this idea that you can have a couple of circles, which, you know, this is Butler, Pennsylvania, so really small town. So the local police that are trained to do nothing but traffic violations, being suddenly faced with a sniper, with an assassin, are literally have no idea, what am I supposed to do in this case, right? Do I have the authority to shoot? And often don't have the ability to communicate with the Secret Service, because there'll be a liaison.
They don't have radios.
Officers.
Yes, of course.
So you will either have, I think, two choices coming up. Either you massively increase the liaison capacity, or you basically say, forget this local police stuff. For henceforth, the Secret Service will be expanded, and all the circles of security, even for candidates and lower level targets, will now be 100% Secret Service.
Absolutely. More jobs for the boys, Sri, in the US. But Colonel Sen, you had a point to make before Pramit spoke.
2 points I want to make is, first, we discussed it before. If you see last time, Slovakian Prime Minister, when Robert Fico was shot. We talked about, you know, complacency. When the threat perception is there, that small town, you know, nobody would have thought that there will be an assassination attempt on Donald Trump. So that thing gets into, you know, the mind of the security forces, and they generally tend to relax. One thing is that. Second thing, you talked about gender, this thing earlier. The question I failed to answer at the time, did not answer. You know, in our line of work, it doesn't matter if, you know, it's a male or female. If there is specific requirements of a person, physical, mental, and both should be, you know, done, should be completed, both should be able, both the genders, or the third gender also, I am in the favor of the third gender also, they should be able to, you know, complete those tasks. If they are fit for that job, then gender doesn't matter. But generally you will find, you know, females are are generally, physically, naturally weak
Yes.
to perform these kind of tasks and other things. So, but out of 100, one odd or two odd girls may beat any special forces officer.
Absolutely.
So they
But
should be taken.
yes, but we're looking at a huge overhaul of the Secret Service, I'm sure. And as Sri was just mentioning, you're looking at possibly a kinder, gentler President Donald Trump as Trump 2.0 takes over at the White House. But thank you very much for joining us this evening. Pramit Pal Chaudhuri, Colonel Sen, and my colleague Sridharan Ramakrishnan. Earlier in the day, I spoke to Dr. Yano Burg, Director, Transnational Foundation for Peace and Future Research, Sweden. I asked him about the attempt on the life of presidential candidate, the USA's violent checkered past, and the US elections.
Political violence is nothing new in the US. You could add the two Kennedys and you could add Martin Luther King. And I'm not sure whether or what will happen after this assassination attempt. If I do some introspection, I would probably say that I'm wondering where I would dare to stand up publicly in the US if I were Trump. And secondly, I think there must be somebody who has to very quickly tell us how this was possible. There were obviously people in the audience who had seen a guy climbing up to that top of the building quite close, and nothing was done. So it's very difficult to say what this was, but it will disunite the United States even more. There is a lot of verbal political violence, including Biden saying that Trump is a threat to democracy and he must not win and things like that. And so, the argument the Americans have in denial of political violence, if you take the statements, by the way, of Harris, Obama, Clinton, and Biden himself, the mantra now is violence does not belong to our society. And I would say it obviously does. Political violence does belong to that system. So I think it's time for the US to recognize that maybe it is not able to lead the world. I don't think it is, but it points in that even stronger in that direction. If you're this disunited and you're this unable to solve your own domestic problems, such as infrastructure, such as poverty, such as 20% living under the minimum of existence, etc., then you cannot claim to be, you have no right to claim to be anybody else but a partner like anybody else in the world. And we're moving into a multipolar world where the United States will not lead. That's totally clear to me. All empires go down. 30 years ago, the Soviet Union went down. Earlier, the British, the Ottoman, the Roman Empire, whatever. And of course, this one is not going to last either. It's in its death throes now. Not the United States, but its empire, its militarism, its interventionism, and all these things must go, including nuclear weapons, to create a better world. There's something very interesting about people working for peace being killed. Gandhi was killed. Olof Palme, the former prime minister here in Sweden, where I sit, was killed for presenting common security, for presenting a criticism of the US-Vietnam War, for whatever. I mean, I'm not saying I know why he was killed, but he was a man of peace, a neutral country for disarmament and a new type of defense and a new Europe. Martin Luther King was killed. Kennedy was killed, John F. Kennedy was killed a few months after he had made his grand speech about a new peace structure in the world that would not be an American peace, but a world peace, and some kind of accommodation with mutual understanding of not necessarily love, but a mutual understanding of Russia and America together. And mind you, also, Trump had just had a meeting with the Hungarian Prime Minister Orban, who had been on a peace mission first to Kiev, then Beijing, and then Moscow, and then Beijing, and then he was in Washington and he met, and he came out with a statement saying Trump will stop the war or something like that. I'm not quite sure of the formulation, but he will do something constructive about the war in Ukraine. Now, I'm not saying that Trump was shot at for that reason, but Trump is the only president who has not started a new war And while he didn't stop any either when he was president, he seems to be more interested in business than in warfare. Whereas it seems to me, from judging from Biden's administration, they are more interested in warfare than in business, both vis-a-vis Russia and vis-a-vis China. It's a very sad situation, but if you ask me, the United States and NATO is now militarizing itself to death.
The INSAS, short for Indian Small Arms Systems, has been the Indian Army's standard rifle for over a quarter century. But the Army now wants to replace this rifle with a Russian-made AK-203. But the AK acquisitions have slowed down as well for various reasons. So the Indian Army is now upgrading its inventory of INSAS rifles slowly. The first consignment of upgraded rifles was handed over to the Northern Command. And joining me to discuss this are Sameer Dhawan, CEO of Star Aerospace, the Indian firm upgrading the rifle, and my colleague Deepak Badana here in the studio with me. Gentlemen, welcome to the News9 Plus show. You've just handed your first consignment of upgraded INSAS rifles to the Indian Army. Tell us what made the Army go in for an upgrade to the rifle we thought had reached the end of its life.
See, there were a couple of factors which came into play. The AK-203, of course, being a slow acquisition. The second was the Army's trial with the 6 Sawyer, the 7.62-51, and finally, we had been working on the INSAS for over 3 years to take away, let's call it 90% of its issues. See, the rifle itself is a very good rifle. Everybody will agree in the Indian Army that it's a very accurate rifle.
Yes.
It had its own flaws, and our way of looking at it was, what if we were to remove those flaws and make it a modern platform? So we went around having this validated first with ARD, then with AVIL. We did trials there also, and then finally we did trials with the Indian Army. And once we did these trials with the Indian Army, they felt that once you put on the upgrades and you remove all the issues, the INSAS is a formidable weapon.
Right.
For various reasons. It is a very formidable weapon because every new platform, you would, end of the day, when you call a modern platform, it's basically a platform to attach optics and do different things with it. And the second thing is you want to make the platform more ergonomic. And most important is, like in the INSAS, the magazine has always been the issue.
Yes.
So once we redesigned the magazine, and what we realized very quickly was initially, the 3-round burst was something which came, from the US side in 1980s. That was a requirement by the US military. So INSAS also had a 3-round burst fire. So what we did was we enhanced the capacity from a 20 to a 30 round, so that when you do your 3-round burst, you still have enough bullets left.
Right.
And then you come at par with the any other platform. So, and the Army then, from that various trials with the upgrades for accuracy, for different things, they found it to be an extremely well-balanced lethal weapon.
Right. So, Samir, just for the benefit of our viewers, just tell us the kind of changes that you've brought in the upgraded INSAS. One is, of course, you mentioned that you're looking at a bigger, higher capacity magazine, 30 rounds instead of 20. And what are the other big changes in this weapon?
So basically, I'll tell you, the one big problem the INSAS always had was, when you carry the weapon, your slings are actually in the center. So what that does is, when the soldier is carrying it, it becomes very uncomfortable on your back. So first of all, we changed the buttstock to make it ambidextrous.
Right.
Second is, for the soldier to, in different conditions and different requirements of stature, so somebody's tall, somebody's short, the buttstock had to be adjustable.
Right.
If somebody's 5'10" versus somebody who's 6'4", you have a different requirement for that. Then what we did was the top portion, which is the rail. So we integrated a new rail into the system, removed the old dust cover, because the old dust cover could only take old Warsaw style optics. And we did a new design for the rail. And along with that, what we did was, in that rail, we also integrated the iron sight, so they would not lose anything on it.
Right. Right.
The forehand guard, originally is very, very thick. And that was done because in the INSAS, the forehand guard always touches the barrel and it gets very hot.
Yes.
So we redesigned the forehand guard completely. Put in kind of like heat sinks into it. So it dissipates all the heat and you could make it very, very thin.
Right.
So these were the few basic things which we did, along with redesigning the whole magazine itself. And getting it into the newer age polymers.
Absolutely. So I was just showing the picture of the upgraded weapon to Deepak here, and he can't believe his eyes that it's the same weapon that we're looking at. You've practically redesigned the INSAS, you've brought it into the 21st century, if I may say so. Yes. But Deepak, you're an INSAS skeptic. You had your very, very strong comments based on your feedback that you've received about the INSAS from troops. You think this is going to change their minds? See, as Sameer was saying, it's been through a whole range of tests. Everybody seems to be on board with this upgrade. You think the INSAS has some life still left in it?
I think most definitely. If you look at the criticism that has come in from the INSAS, it's largely come from people who have seen it in action.
Right.
And they've reported their own problems in working with the system. So I imagine, as Sir has just said, that a number of those niggles have been removed. I can't imagine anything better for the soldiers on the ground.
Right.
Let's just hope when the rubber hits the road.
Right. Well, when the rubber hits the road, let's see what the effect is going to be, what the impact is going to be. But, Sameer, tell us this about the INSAS itself. There have been questions raised on its reliability in combat. The firing mechanisms, what changes have you brought in the firing mechanisms to ensure that there's no jamming?
If you see, we figured out, through our different trials, that all the jamming issues in the INSAS, had nothing to do with the firing mechanism, but it was to do with the magazine.
Right.
Okay. And what was happening was, in the modern times, what one needs to understand is that, polymers today replace a lot of, the old nylon plastics and different things. And INSAS, being an assault rifle, we found that the magazine design itself had lots of issues when you're doing, consistent firing.
Right.
The lips would expand,
yes.
The catch would get loose and it would fall off, all those kind of things. And the way the magazine was designed, with the metal insert and different things, it was, actually becoming a bigger problem. And what we found was once we redesigned the magazine, because that was the first thing we did.
Yes.
The other things are much easier, but redesigning a complete magazine so it becomes very reliable. Now that is what makes it very, very impressive. And we've had in Avil, they fired 200 rounds, 300 rounds non-stop. And we've tried this with almost, lot of military units, lot of MHA units. And we've just also got an approval from the MHA because they had constituted a board for upgrading the INSAS. So that has also happened. And if you will see that, now with no stoppages, because of the magazine.
Yes.
The rest of the mechanism is perfect. There's nothing wrong with it.
Right. So it was the magazine that was the main culprit in all of this. But Deepak, when Sameer was talking, I was reminded of the M4 and the AR-15 before that. It was one of the worst rifles where it entered service in the 60s in Vietnam. Soldiers hated it because it just jammed all the time. But then it's now become one of the most reliable weapons in the world.
Of course, because
it's the
over
M4
time,
and the M16.
there's feedback from the ground.
Yes.
And that feedback goes into improving it, much like what is happening to the INSAS right now.
Right. That looks like the way ahead for the INSAS. There's life still left in the INSAS. But Sameer, last question before I let you go. What is the export potential for the INSAS? We've exported it to a few countries who haven't been very happy with the performance again, Nepal and Myanmar. You see new life for the INSAS, upgraded INSAS as an export platform that would interest a lot of other countries.
Definitely, because see, if you incorporate these things in the new weapon,
yes.
End of the day, INSAS is actually a true rifle, right? AK is like a submachine gun. Okay, right. It's not a rifle. The only other rifle is an M4, right? Because of the firing mechanism and the way it is. And for soldiers, an alternate to the M4, as the INSAS is, and plus, not very many people know this. The INSAS bullet is slightly longer by a few millimeters than a NATO round, and the advantage of that is your bullets can't be used upon you.
Yes.
And that is itself, is a huge advantage. Along with, when you look at training, when you look at, spares, supply lines, one caliber across. And I feel export, it has a huge potential because it's a true rifle.
It's a true rifle, huge export potential for it. But the big story here is that the INSAS, a rifle that everyone gave up for dead, is now back. It's reborn as the INSAS upgraded rifle. It's now been issued to the Northern Army Command for the first time. And we just spoke with Samir Dhawan, CEO of Star Aerospace, who's handed those rifles over to the Indian Army. And who knows, it could be the beginning of a new chapter for this rifle that's endured nothing but criticism for over 25 years. Thank you very much for joining us, Samir Dhawan, my colleague Deepak Badana.